Um, what I'll be saying, of course, is very, very different from the last person that spoke. In my first day in Parliament, I was 29 years of age, almost 30, and Tom Aikens, who's a huge man, he's about 6'4", and he was thrown out of the Labor Party because he was probably a communist, Tom. He was the member for this area. If you were living here at Riches, he would have been your member of Parliament, Tom. And that's a huge man with a magnificent voice. In 3 of the history books, I wrote a very successful history of Australia, which sold over 20,000 copies, published through Murdoch Press, which I'm very proud of. But Tom features prominently, and in all the history books it says he was the best speaker in Australia. Menzies was very good, but Menzies couldn't inject humour like Tom could. So when I walked into Parliament, he put his arm around me and said, he's 6'4", I'm only 6 foot, and he said, "Bob, Katter, Cloncurry, I'll have to look after you, my son, I'll have to look after you." He's about 78, and I'm about 20, I'm 29. He said, "Now, if you want a future in politics," this is 41 years ago, he said, "you must be able to take a small molehill of truth and create from it a vast edifice of illusion." His protagonist, Robert Menzies, I was there at his last campaign speech. There was a bloke down the front yelling out, "You know, what are you going to do about housing, Pegawine? Housing, Pegawine, what are you going to do about housing, Pegawine? Housing, housing." Menzies paused and he looked down and he said, "The first thing I'm going to do about it, sir, is to put a H on the front of it." When Michael Organ came into Parliament, he was the first Green ever elected to Parliament in Australia. And he was sat, and unfortunately and unpleasantly for poor old Michael, in front of me. And I leaned over and I said, "Now listen, Michael, you're the Greens member of Parliament here, and I'm the anti-Greens member of Parliament." And he looked at me rather quizzically. And he said, "Listen, Bob," he said, "I thought I'd come in here. I know nothing about this. I know nothing about politics or anything." He said, "Mate, I just thought I'd come in here and I'd just tell reality, tell the truth, just tell the truth." And I said, "Well, it's an interesting approach. It's never been tried here before, but you could try it out." I regard myself as a very ardent student of nature, most certainly not a graduate. The Australian landscape, and I had a very great privilege in my life to have spent many months, maybe a year or so of my life, out in the bush with the last Kalkadoons. His mother, in fact, was one of a few Piccaninny survivors of the battle on Battle Range, Les Prosser. And it gave me very great insights into who we are, where we have come from, and what has created the Australian landscape. And of course, the Australian landscape is created by fire. Geoffrey Blaney, in his very excellent book, Triumph of the Nomads, Geoffrey will constantly talk about, we arrived on the beach in Tasmania, Van Diemen's Land as it was then known, and there were 24 natives, all holding brands of fire in their hands. Logan Jack, when he goes out from Cairns, he records that he saw 23 fires, Aboriginal fires, burning before dinner camp, which is the first sort of meal you have in the day. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. And some 6 months later, the only notation he makes is, we went a whole day and only saw 3 fires taking place. So Australia's landscape has been created by fire, but it was gentle fire. Every bushman knows that you do not burn late in the year. You'll get a fierce fire that will destroy everything. You must burn early in the year where there is not enough fuel on the ground to cause a fierce fire. Now, if you have fierce fire it will actually take out gum trees, which are a very fire-resistant tree. But worse still, it will burn all the gum tree seeds in the ground. And they are so small that you arguably need a magnifying glass to see the seeds of a gum tree. They get in little granule and bury themselves. A light fire won't hurt them. They're sort of buried in the sand and the soil. But a fierce fire will destroy all of the seeds. Now, light fire is also needed to destroy the dieback disease. It sanitises the ground. So if we do not have fire, then the gum trees will be gone. Having said that, that's the most iconic image of Australia, the gum tree. Let us have a look. God gave us this great country. God gave us this huge country. It's almost as big an area as China or the United States or Brazil. It's almost the biggest country and area on earth. And it is not bereft of water. In fact, if the top third of Australia was a separate country, it would be one of the wettest countries on earth. So it is not a dry land. On the top third is an extremely wet land. Now, this great gift, this great treasure, that's a quote from Ted Theodore. Who knows who Ted Theodore is? Hold your hand up. 1, 2, 3 people. Heavens, that's fantastic. Congratulations to you all. Malcolm Fraser was asked who his heroes were. He said Ted Theodore and the American Franklin Roosevelt. Paul Keating was asked who his heroes were. He said J.T. Lang and Ted Theodore. And I have a huge picture on my wall of the great Jack McEwen and, of course, read Ted Theodore. And Jamie Packer came and said, hey, my dad's greatest friend. But easily the most important person in Australian history, Theodore, by far and away the most important person in Australian history. But not only are we not taught about our country and its nature, but we are also not taught about the political history, which is very hard to take away from. And when I say it's very hard to divorce the political and economic environment from the natural environment, let me give you examples. There is 7 million hectares of the most beautiful land on earth, the black soil plains of North Queensland, what we call the Midwest Plains. They stretch for 1,000 kilometres from this side of Hughenden right across to the airport at Cloncurry, and then all the way up to the Gulf, and all the way down to Blackwall and Barcaldine almost. And so what is happening on this great plain? All of the 20 million hectares of the Great Plain, I suppose, maybe 70 or 80 million hectares, 7 million hectares is heavily infested by prickly acacia tree, which is destroying everything. All the grass, all the animals. The most endangered species in Australia is Judy Creek Dunnet. But to give you an example of just how far our environmentalists, the people who are supposed to be looking after and protecting our environment, their knowledge levels. And sorry, but I have to name CSIRO, the University of Queensland, and the Brisbane Museum. I took my little grandkids in, and here is the Julia Creek Dunnet, the most endangered species in Australia. And it's endangered by cattle pugging the ground. Now, the best naturalist I know in Australia is a bloke called Steve Malone. So I rang Steve Malone up and I said, mate, I've got great news for you. We've just found out that the Julia Creek Dunnet is vanishing because the hard-hoofed animals are pugging the ground. And he killed himself laughing. It was about 3 minutes before he stopped laughing. The ground is vertisol soils. It's cracking clays. Late in the year, the cracks are down 2 or 3 feet deep. The entire ground is just cracked clay. I mean, of its very nature, it can't be pugged. But what is killing them, of course, is the prickly acacia tree. It's taken away the leaves, of the Flinders Mitchell grass, and of course by doing that it has taken away the insects, and the insects are eaten by the dunnet. No insects, no dunnet. And a magnificent illustration of just what is happening out there. We have over 3 million pigs in the Midwest Plains, and and they are the most destructive of animals. They dig into the ground to take out roots on the river banks and creeks. So when the floods come, and all of our rivers flood in northern Australia, when the floods come, of course, there is no protection. There is nothing to hold the banks together. It has been taken by the pigs. They're rife with numerous diseases as well. I don't want to go too far on toads and rabbits and bats. And bats are a natural animal in Australia, but their numbers are completely out of all proportion to what they were in days past, because man has created a beautiful environment out there, and they're saying, beauty, we'll take that, thank you, thank you. Except they don't say thank you, they do something on top of us. In the Great Debate, Riverside Great Debate they call it, the first year they had it, and I think the last year they had it, there were 700 there, and we put our case for the development of the water resources of Australia. And I, in my usual shy, retiring, humble way, thought I gave an absolutely brilliant address, clever throughout, and I got a vote 700 to 20 against, about the same vote I got in the last federal election, actually. But I thought I was particularly clever because I said, you know, there are 2,000 million people going to bed on this world that we live in hungry tonight. And 100 million of them live in our nearest neighbouring country. We are, whether we like it or not, a Christian nation. We believe the essence of Christianity is love your neighbour. Well, we love them a real lot because 100 million going to bed starving of a night, and we just cut off their protein supply 2 years ago. And if they don't love us, well, they're well and truly entitled not to love us. But if there is one truism of history, that a people without land will look for a land without people. Go no further than the Second World War, and the bloke that started it, he wrote it all down in a book called Mein Kampf. You can take it out and read it. If you want to read the most boring book ever written in human history. But page after page he talks about living room. The German people are cramped up. We need space. And Poland and Russia, they have plenty of space but not many people. So what are we going to do? We're going to fix that up. Now, the other mob that came at us, the Japanese, a little black book. Every single soldier was given his little black book, told him about hygiene, personal health, how to clean his rifle, the importance of keeping his gun clean. And it also told him why they were in New Guinea and Indonesia and Burma and Malaysia and the Philippines and in China. It said that Europeans, 300 million Europeans, were controlling 1,000 million Asians. They should not be here. And it is the duty of Japan to rid Asia of the European menace, who are bleeding us dry. Now, it was also a country with, there were 60 or 70 people, jammed little tiny area, about the same size as Victoria. And we have this big empty land here with all this water. And people say, and the Premier of New South Wales, Mr. Carr, he say continuously, this country cannot support 20 million people. You bloody imbecile. My electorate can support 100 million people by only taking 7% of the water and 2% of the land. And that is not a figure plucked out of the air. That is the actual figures taken from the Murray-Darling experience. They take 8 million megalitres of water and about 2 million megalitres of land under irrigation, and they feed 20 million people. So since we have 300 million megalitres of water, only have 20 million megalitres of water, we have 300 million megalitres of water, basically in northeastern Australia, North Queensland if you like, a bit of the Northern Territory, a little bit up Western Australia, trying. We can easily feed, and if you're watching that river, our rivers do not like the Murray-Darling that flow all the time. Our rivers are giant floods. I mean, the Gilbert River and the Flinders River and the Norman River, they become one at the mouth. It's 60 or 70 kilometres wide at the mouth. And then late in the year, there's nothing there at all. Nothing there at all, just a dry riverbed. Now, what is happening here, the natural cycle in Australia is hugely destructive. We have 9 months of dry, which means the ground cover is gone. It's dead, it's gone. The ground cover is gone. And then we have cyclonic monsoonal troughs with the sky falls on top of us with nothing to protect the ground. And it rips and tears and rages away the beautiful soils, the wonderful land that God has given us, are ripped and torn and slaughtered and driven into the sea, where they're sterilised by seawater. Now that is the natural cycle. And I'm going to switch now and just give a quick history of water development in Australia. It really starts, there was no one living in Australia until the gold rushes. Not long after the gold rushes started in the 60s and 70s, the Federation drought, and really it didn't rain much in Australia. It's really scary actually. From 1984 to 1914, and hence the name of the Federation drought. But 3/4 of our sheep numbers vanished, arguably 90% of our sheep numbers vanished. That was our major activity in those days. But there was Federation drought. And no one thought you could do anything in this country except leave and go back to England, or Ireland more specifically. Then World War I hit us, and all we did was fight for Britain's life. And lost many, many lives, including my great-granddad's brother. Straight after World War I, we had a 7 or 8 short years, something like that, whatever it was, and we ran straight into the Depression. So nothing happened in the Depression, because Otto Niemeyer from the Bank of England was brought out here to tell us how to run a depression. He created the depression in England, and he magnificently created the worst depression in the world here in Australia. So nothing happened during the Depression. And then World War II, we were fighting for our lives. And we had no industrial development, so we had no aeroplanes, fighter planes, we had no machine guns, we had no artillery, we had nothing to defend Australia with. My own battalion, the 49th Battalion, I wasn't there, I'm pretty old, but I wasn't there. It went up there with one machine gun to stop the Japanese, who had nearly 1,000 machine guns. And I call my book An Incredible Race of People, because we are an incredible race of people. The extraordinary thing was, we did stop the Japanese with one machine gun. I obviously oversimplify, we had a lot of machine guns towards the end. Well, then we came out of World War II, and in my history of Australia, I described this period as walking with giants. These were the truly great men took over Australia. Les Thies, lovely story. 11 little Thies kids, they go to church, walk 5 kilometres to church every Sunday, but they weren't allowed to wear their shoes. They carried their shoes and they put their shoes on to go into the church. When they came back, they took their shoes off. Each of them had to milk 3 cows before they went to school of a morning, and milk 3 cows when they came back. And this lovely, wonderful family, they built the Snowy Mountains. They built the Gold Coast. They created out of nothing the Australian coal industry, which has carried the economy of Australia now for the last 60 years. Our economy has depended almost exclusively upon coal. So this is a period of walking with giants. And this is when the Snowy Mountains was built and dams were built all over the countryside, and things really started to happen. great things for our country. In North Queensland, the dam started to get up here where the water was. Emerald was built at Emerald, Kinshant was built at Mackay, giant Burdekin Falls just south of Townsville, up behind Ayr, the Mareeba irrigation project, which is small but significant. These were all built. And then Bajocki Peterson and Malcolm Fraser announced that they were building the Bradfield scheme. And I might add under a lot of badgering by myself and a famous university lecturer who was a very shy bloke, he doesn't like his name being used, and the other one, Roy Stanky. But Dr. Bradfield was no fool. This man built Sydney Harbour Bridge. He built the Story Bridge in Brisbane. He built the underground railway system in Sydney, which is still being used today without much change to it at all. And it was built 100 years ago. This is the foresight of this man. He also built the Burrinjuck Dam and the Hume Weir. But the thing he's most famous for is the Bradfield scheme, which he didn't build. And he said, if you fill Lake Eyre, it'll make it rain in inland Australia. Well, the Murray-Darling has 22 million megalitres of water in it each year. The evaporation off Lake Eyre would be 30 million megalitres. So 22 million currently in the Murray-Darling. This will give an extra 30 million megalitres on top of that. Now, you'll get argument about this, but the prevailing winds blow that way, and on the balance of evidence, that will occur. But he said you could move the high level, where it rains all the time, up north of us here, 400-500 inch rainfall annually. Some of that water, little tiny bit, you can't move very much of it, but it's a hell of a lot of water when you take it inland, little tiny bit, and fill up Lake Eyre. He also said you could build a ditch and fill Lake Eyre that way and turn inland Australia into Guyana, which is Aboriginal for field of flowers. And this was the vision of the man. But within 6 months, Fraser was gone, Bajocki Peterson was gone, and we moved from developmentalism in Australia. We had to develop after the war. You know, we realised that we couldn't continue to exist as a nation unless we developed in every sense of the word. But with the election of the governments that came in the 80s, we switched from developmentalism to marketism. Money, greed will drive the country now. You know, we don't need a collective will of the people. Don't worry about the collective will of the people. You know, just greed will drive it. Coal seam gas. Oh, we will get $23,000 million a year out of coal seam gas. No, you won't. No, you won't. 6 foreign corporations will get $23,000 million a year. We Australians, we will get about $2,000 million a year is what we'll get out of it. And we will sacrifice the underground water supplies in a lot of parts of Australia. Now, we only have cattle and sheep, 2 commodities which carried Australia up to the coming of coal. They only exist because the underground water supplies. If you destroy the underground water supplies, then you destroy those 2 base industries, which collectively are still very significant in the Australian economy. But if you want to completely denude inland Australia, then go right ahead and do that. The Great Artesian Basin came out of a place called, outside of Boulia, called Spring Creek, and it ran for 85 kilometres, the creek. It was the Great Artesian Basin. The water came in here, went in a U-tube effect and surfaced way out there west of Boulia, and it ran for 82 kilometres. And there were kangaroos and wildlife and grass and trees and everything out there. Well, what we did was when we put the bores down, we created 20,000 kilometres of bore drains. So we replaced that 80 kilometres with 20,000 kilometres of bore drains. So that's a rough history of the background. Now, what I'd like to paint for you is the current situation in Australia. And how am I going for time? Good. I was Minister for Aboriginal and Island Affairs, and I visited the Torres Straits almost on a fortnightly basis during those 7 or 8 years. The complete control of the department was put under the First Australians themselves, Eric Law, Lester Rosendale, and self-management was delivered to all the islands. They were sort of like little mini self-governing states. And this was tremendously successful, lauded in 2 books, one by Rosamund Child, How We Civilise, still on the reading list at universities, and another one by Father Frank Brennan, Land Rights Queensland style. And both those books are very highly flattering of what we did in those years. But when I went to Torres Straits, there were 3 things that hit you really big. One was before every meal, you had to sing a hymn and say a prayer, and God would look after us. And in the terrible battle to get self-management, I asked George Moore, I said, how can you keep fighting? After 40 years, you've not got one single victory. You are just puppets being pulled by the white fellas in Brisbane. And he said, because we're going to win. I said, 40 years of straight losses, George. If I was a betting man. And he said, no, he is on our side. God is on our side. We're going to win. And he believed that. The bloke that actually won the Mabo case was Father Passy, George's closest friend. Mabo had never been to the island, so he was booted out on the 3rd day of the trial. It was Father Passy that actually carried it. And the second thing that hit you was the meals were really magnificent meals, and they were all local produce. Crayfish, dugong, turtle, fish, crabs, bit of pig and chicken, and tam, yarrow, bananas, sweet potatoes, all local produce produced in their own market gardens on their islands. Now, this is really ugly, me telling you this. You're a lot of young people here. This is really ugly. In fact, this is about as ugly a thing in Australia as you can see today. Professor Ian Wronski, one of the greatest living Australians at JCU University, he said, you realise how bad diabetes is? And I said, tell me. He said, epidemic proportions. We have a complete runaway epidemic on our hands. I went to Dormagee, First Australian settlement up northwest Queensland, and I said, Freddie O'Keefe, hey Freddie, any of your relatives dying of diabetes? He said, 3. I said, Barry Walden, Barry, any of yours? He said, 4. Logie, 2. The lady there, his name's eluding me at the present moment, she said 3. Now, how many people here have got relatives dying of diabetes? Hold your hands up. 1. 1 out of, 2 out of maybe 120, right? It was 5 out of 5 there. And they didn't just have 1, they had multiple. It is infinitely worse than the Torres Straits. Now, we Australians, we've got a lot of things to be utterly ashamed of. We let no Jews in here during the war. They were forced to stay in Germany and be gassed to death, 6 million of them. So don't go running around blaming the Germans too much, because we've got a fair bit to answer for there too. We get many shames in our history books, but I think maybe the greatest shame will be the genocide that was committed on the black people of Australia in the years of our Lord, 80s, 90s. Not the 80s, the 90s and the 2000s. There's a whole race of people dying out there. When I went into the supermarket at Yam Island, 1/7, I measured it with my feet, 1/7 of the shelves were rice. Whilst I was up there on a government tour, I did not touch one single bit of local food at all. All of it was being bought in. These people have very little income. They cannot afford to buy fresh fruit and vegetable. And to quote Joey Mosby, not one of my greatest fans, in fact, just the opposite, but at this meeting, he yelled out, Bobby, like we were great mates. Bobby, they're killing, they're murdering our people. They say we cannot have farms because, diseases might get into Australia. So we die because diseases might get into Australia. He said, we've been growing these things for 200 years and the diseases haven't gotten to Australia. He said, we're not allowed to fish because only if you've got a licence, which costs a lot of money, are you allowed to go fishing anymore. So we're not allowed to fish. Only rich people from white fellas are allowed to fish. The corporates are allowed to fish. They said, we're not allowed to have our farms or our pigs or our chooks anymore. We're to buy it and we haven't got enough money to buy it in. So we're starving to death up here. What are you going to do about it? Mining has created great wealth for Australia. And the news that I bring today to young people is the party is over. The party is well and truly over. South America, which was doing no mining, how the hell are they going to mining in Brazil? There's still headhunters running around and people taking it for ransom and drug sellers and everything like that. Well, that's not the situation. And government's changing every, 2 seconds by revolution. I think there was a revolution in Brazil every 7 years. But in the last 50 years, there's been democracy, stable democracy in Brazil. All of the mining areas being opened up now on a massive scale. So suddenly we've got huge competitors. Africans, the Chinese fly in, 6 months later fly out. There is a town and an operating mine. Now, if you've got an area the size of Africa, which is a lot bigger than Australia, you'll have a lot more minerals than Australia will have. If you've got an area like Uzbekistan and Mongolia and Kazakhstan, you've got an area bigger than Australia. It'll have a lot more minerals than Australia. But where our minerals have been mined out, we're at great depth at Mount Isa. 5 mines are closed to charter status because they're just too deep to get the stuff out of the ground commercially anymore. Our coal, the party is well and truly over with coal. Indonesia's soared past us as the biggest coal exporting nation on earth 3 years ago. In agriculture, we will be a net importer of food within 7 years. You've heard your Prime Minister get up there and say, we're going to be the food bowl of Asia. Say to the last Prime Minister, say the Prime Minister before that, say the Prime Minister before that, say the Prime Minister before that, we're going to be the food bowl of Asia. Hey, listen, wake up to yourself. Wake up to yourself. You're already a net importer of fruit and vegetables. You're already a net importer of seafood. You won't be able to feed yourself, let alone feed any other part of the world. Wake up to yourself. And by the way, if anyone wants to question any of these things I'm saying, I always carry the figures around with me. I always carry the figures around with me. Just a few jottings there. Sheep numbers down 62%, sugar production down 17%, cattle numbers down 22%, dairy herd down over 30%. And we're a net importer of fruit and vegetables in this country. So you can see where this is going. Now, I want to quickly paint for you in the time that I have left what it should look like, what my homeland, Northern Australia, should look like. Firstly, it's moral responsibilities to the rest of the world to grow food. And I have to jump back to that Riverside debate, one of my more brilliant sallies. The bloke said, I said, we must feed the starving, the 2,000 million people that are starving on earth. We have a moral responsibility to do this. And there will be, if food does not cross borders, then guns will. That's a quote from von Clausewitz, who with Sun Tzu on War Standards, the 2 great books on warfare in the world. And if you read history, that is most certainly true. Japan would not trade, so Admiral Perry came in and blew them into trading. China would not trade, and the Europeans just simply invaded and took control of China. If you think that you can sit there and do nothing, then you believe in the tooth fairy. And they say it'll never happen. It is happening now. There are 3 irrigation projects in Australia. One is the Ord, which has been given to the Chinese. 2 is the Gilbert River, which I believe has already been given to the Chinese. And 3 is Charter Towers Pentland project, where we are desperately trying to keep the Chinese at bay. But the government won't put a cent up. They won't do anything to help. So there's no one in Australia. Superannuation funds are the only people that have got money in Australia, and they're terrified because everything's going so bad on them. They're just investing in real estate and the share market. That's all they invest in. So there's no money to build dams. All the governments tell us they're broke. Well, it's just an interesting concept, broke. The Premier of Queensland told us he was broke, and then he announced 5,000 million. It's 10% of his entire budget for a new tunnel in Brisbane. We have more tunnels in Brisbane than we have in London or New York. Put it in perspective, Sydney has 14 kilometres of tunnels and Brisbane has 24 kilometres. Sydney has 5 million people, Brisbane has 1 million people. But he's got no money, but he's plucked 5,000 million straight out of the air for a tunnel. Found 1,000 million for Taj Mahal. He's pulling down his building, the existing building, which is not old at all, it's only 20 years old, which is brand new for a skyscraper. He's pulling down a 23-storey building, and he's building a super palatial, even more super palatial, digs for himself. Now, we're transferring 7th grade over a little fight between primary and secondary, and that's going to cost us 2,000 million. So when you say you haven't got any money, well, it's a relative term. And as the great economist John Quiggin in The Australian said, we got money, but what we have most of all is tunnel vision. And it was a beautiful phrase with a richness of meaning. You can buy boats with a tunnel. In Brisbane, you announce the tunnel and you put the foundation stone. That's one opening ceremony. And then you have work starting, you have another opening ceremony. And then you have the commencement of the first actual, hole in the ground. And then you have another opening ceremony. I think for Burdekin Falls, we had 23 opening ceremonies. Each one got the politicians on the front page of the northern newspapers. So tunnel vision is magnificent. We got it with spades in Australia. But I want to paint for you a different picture. All of the world runs their motor cars on ethanol, right? There's a map of the world here. Every single country on earth is coloured in, with the exception, obviously, of the oil-producing countries. All the European Union countries signed up 15%. China, India, Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, all moving up 15%. Brazil's on 60%. America is almost much bigger production now than Brazil, and it's 20% of all their motor vehicle fuels are ethanol. They're all doing it because people die from motor vehicle emissions. They're not doing it because they love farmers or they want to get up the Arabs or anything like that. The reports coming out of California left them no alternative to go there. But if you go to ethanol, you dramatically reduce not the amount of CO2 going up into the atmosphere, you reduce the amount of CO2 that is already up there with ethanol. And I refer to you to page 137, the patron saint of all greenies, Al Gore's book, An Inconvenient Truth. His first solution on page 137 is ethanol. Obviously, if you burn ethanol, CO2 goes up in the air, exactly the same as with petrol. You burn petrol, CO2 goes up in the atmosphere. Burn ethanol, CO2 goes up in the atmosphere. But one hell of a difference. The next year, the sugar cane and the grain pull it back down again. So it's just going up and down like a yo-yo. I don't want to go too much on just how good it is for the soils in Australia, regenerating soils in Australia, where we're using much more microbial and carbon action in the soils now than ever before, thank goodness. If the government provides, at the Charters Towers proposal, 60 kilometres due west of here, the proposal is for a big dam there, which will be a magnificent recreational resource for this town. Instead of pumping water to Townsville, the Electricity Commission will pay us when we turn the tap on, because the water's falling 1,000 feet to get it, so we get hydroelectricity out of it, and unlimited industrial expansion in this area. But the water's taken down south of Charters Towers, and the mooted cost 5,000 million. I think it'll come in under 4,000 million. You say, well, that's a lot of money. Where are you going to get that from? Well, the answer to that is nowhere. Nowhere. Because superannuation funds have decided not to build anything. They're going to buy built assets, but they're not going to build anything, because every time they've attempted to build something, they've gone broke. So the only people with money is superannuation. So you want them in, you have to give them a government guarantee, not on the money, but on the water rights. They love water rights, but they won't build a dam. So a government guarantee over $1,500 million is what we require. We need government resumption of land. Never in human history has there ever been an irrigation scheme built without government resumption. And our minister here is at university at 24 and Parliament at 26. I do not have a high opinion of the minister. He said, we will never resume land. Well, you never resume land, you'll never have a water project. So that would have to be, and when I say resumed, you buy it. Most of them would kill you in the rush to sell their properties at the present moment, unfortunately and sadly. And they have to acknowledge that there is a subsidy on electricity, $660 million a year, almost all of it's used to pump electricity up to North Queensland. You lose an awful lot of energy if you want to pump it. It's like pumping water, pumping electrons this huge distance. And I can see I'm being closed down here. So let us just say that if you do those things, Pentland will happen. Straight after that, the Gilbert River will happen. Straight after that, the Mitchell River will happen. And then the Urana at the back of Mackay and the Reverse Tully Mill Stream and the Midwest projects and the Bradfield project. And all we will take will be 6 or 7% of the water. 93% of the flood water, you're watching a flood now, it will look exactly the same next year, even if you take all of that water out, because 93% of it will still be there, and it only comes in this huge, giant rush. But if you do those things, then you will give to your country a stable beef industry, where we have at the present moment a farmer committing suicide every 2 weeks, just between Burketown, Normanton and Longreach, one every 2 weeks. And I've got 3 cases where I'm desperately praying that we can come up with something at the present moment on our books. But that will deliver to your country $8,000 million a year. Ethanol will deliver to your country $11,000 million. We send $23,000 million a year over the Middle East to buy oil, to pollute the atmosphere. Whereas you can do it here and reduce the pollution in the atmosphere and save a lot of lives in our big cities as well. Prawn farming, $8,000 million a year. Lake Eyre, with that water, $3,000 million a year. Silicon, which takes us into optical fibre, and I'm not going to go into how and why we need water. A canal built, which is water again, back into the giant phosphate and iron ore deposits south of Burketown. If you do that as well, you'll get $10,000 million. That is $50,000 million a year for the Australian people. Our old people are going to bed hungry tonight, not able to buy food. Those poor people up in the Torres Straits and at Dormanchi, I mean, clearly the laws have to be changed with respect to them. But also they will have jobs available to them. These areas are not in the big cities. These areas are out adjacent to the Dormanchis and the Cowanyamas. So, ladies and gentlemen, we don't do that in Australia. We have, and I really am concluding, we have a party called the Greens. They believe in making the cake smaller. When I made that brilliant point at Riverside, I said, we have a responsibility of people starving. And my opponent, he got up and he said, well, there's too many people in the world, see? That's the problem. And I said, oh, geez, I hadn't thought of that. We starve them to death, that solves the population problem. I hadn't thought of that. I thought it was very clever, actually, but no one laughed. Except me, of course. You get the Labor Party, who are very preoccupied, could be a good bad thing, with dividing the cake. Everyone gets a little bit. Their opponents would say everyone gets nothing. And you have the LNP, who believes in hoarding it all. you know, we've got to think about this. We can't rush in. We've got to have a report. Well, there's been $152 million spent on reports in North Queensland. And Winston Churchill, I finish on these two quotes. Winston Churchill described a discussion paper as an indefinite postponement of any decision, or alternatively as a very decisive decision for indefinite postponement. And I conclude with the words of Stan Coster, one of the great Australians. He wrote most of Slim Dusty's really beautiful songs. And he said, I went to a pub and there was a returned serviceman there. And we had a conversation and I went home and wrote this song straight away. He said, this is what he said, this returned serviceman in his pub. You say you belong to Australia, my friend, and like me, you'll die for this land to defend. But let us be honest, it's sad, but it's true. Australia, my friend, doesn't belong to you. We've been sold out by the powers that be to big wealthy nations way over the sea. They tried once to take us with bullets and lead, but now they've decided to buy us instead. I wonder if the ghosts of the fallen can see the crime and corruption and vast poverty, a lost generation of youth on the dole, adrift on life's oceans without any goals. I once had a dream of my country so grand, where rivers out back irrigated the land, with dams and canals in that wasteland out there, and big inland cities with work everywhere. But then I woke from dreaming to reality. Australia's wealth, it goes over the sea. Thank you very much. Great honour to say a few words to you.